Every revolution starts in the minds of the people.
Arm yourself for the war of ideas. Take back your life. Take back your liberty. Tom Mullen Talks Freedom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tom Mullen Talks Freedom. Today is Tuesday, February 4th, and we have a lot to talk about in terms of the economy and some of the fireworks that the new president, President Trump, back in office now for a couple of weeks and not wasting any time in getting after his agenda. I guess what I want to say off the top, because I'm going to say some things that are critical of what Trump's doing, is that, people are so reflexive these days. I actually voted for Trump the first time in my lifetime. And how many years have I been eligible to vote? Over 40 years that I've ever voted for a Republican or a Democrat. I didn't necessarily vote in the 80s. I don't think I voted in the 88 election. When was the first one I was eligible for? 84? I can't remember. I might have been eligible. And then in the 1990s, I had already come to the conclusion that the Republican and Democratic parties were completely useless. So I know I voted for Ross Perot the two elections I could in the 90s. Then I stopped voting again. I swear I came up with the tagline, "Don't vote, it only encourages them," before the guy who wrote the book, and I can't remember his name. Was it PF? I can't remember. But hey, I should have written the book. What can I say? So in any case, there's a number of reasons I voted for Trump. One of the things is I live in New York, and it really didn't make a difference. Trump wasn't going to win New York. Kamala Harris was going to win New York. And usually I vote for the Libertarian candidate. In this century, I've always voted for the Libertarian candidate, except in 2008, where I didn't vote for Bob Barr, just because he's a Republican. I know Gary Johnson was a recycled Republican, but much better than Bob Barr, even though not great. And I thought that the candidate this year was just, my vote doesn't count. The Libertarian Party doesn't care or know who I voted for unless they listen to this podcast. But I thought, you know what, to the extent it makes any difference at all, I'm protesting that we put up another person begging for approval from the establishment. And that's why I did not vote for the Libertarian candidate this year. And from a practical standpoint, I also wanted to send a message to New York State. There's one more Trump vote in New York State. My state is just horrible. But in any case, all that being said, I expect, and I'm already seeing Trump doing some good things. I knew he was going to do a lot of bad things, and I'm going to talk about a few of those things today, just because I think some of the things he's doing and some of the things he doesn't have his eye on, or his administration doesn't have his eye on, are landmines that could potentially undo the good work that he will do during his administration. So obviously, as a libertarian, it's a small thing. It's one person, but coming through on that promise to free Ross Ulbright. I mean, come on. They put this kid in jail for the rest of his life for starting a website. Well, people committed crimes on it. Okay. Well, people commit crimes with the US dollar all the time, but we don't see Jay Powell going to jail. Okay. Or the members of Congress who created the Federal Reserve or continue to refuse to repeal it. People use the banking system for money laundering all the time, every day, and no one goes to jail. So, of course, this was just to make an example of somebody who was somewhat connected to Bitcoin, other people who were not doing anything similar. The guy from New Hampshire, I guess I'm getting over the hill because the names keep escaping me, but for the radio show that's been in New Hampshire forever, Libertarian, he got harassed, arrested. I'm not sure if he went to jail or took a plea, but they were hitting a lot of people back then who had anything to do with Bitcoin, and not necessarily, the whole case about Ross and the supposed hitman, that was all nonsense. Okay, they didn't charge him with that, and it's not like they said, well, we're going to take it easy on him. If they had any kind of a case, they would have charged him. So I'm glad to see Trump did that. Great, great job. And I mean, right as I record this, what's trending on Twitter is him writing some order to get rid of the Department of Education. Now, what exactly that means without Congress also doing what they have to do for it to no longer be a federal department, we'll see. It was created by Jimmy Carter. So presidents can create any departments they want, but only Congress can empower that department to do anything other than execute existing laws, and only Congress can fund it. So we'll see what ensues with the Department of Education. Ronald Reagan, and one thing on that I'll say is that the Department of Education has only existed since 1979, and I believe it went into operation in 1980. So throughout the 1970s, I went to kindergarten in 1970, and I graduated from eighth grade school in 1979. And that entire time, there was no Department of Education. Now, I did go to a Catholic school, but all my friends in the neighborhood went to the public school that was a block from my house, where we used to play pickup baseball every day in the summer. People used to do stuff like that. No play dates. Kids would just come out of their houses and gather in the middle of the street with gloves and bats and balls. And we'd walk a block to the high school and use, one of the diamonds that wasn't in use and play pickup baseball games. That's how we used to do it. But in any case, all those people went to public school throughout the 70s without any Department of Education, as well as every generation before them. So I can tell you firsthand, there were public schools, grammar schools, high schools, colleges before the Department of Education, and everybody did just fine. In fact, the results were much, much higher in the 1970s than they are today. The funding for the Department of Education has gone straight up, and the results have gone straight down. So not surprising if you think the way I do, but for most people that may come as a surprise. So all of the embryonics, hysterics that you're going to hear if they get rid of this federal department are exactly that. It's just hysterics. Education will be just fine. There's no reason that you have to send a bunch of money to the federal government. I don't know if they sprinkle it with holy water or what, and then they send it back to your state. Okay. It's not, no. So all that is some central planning by people in Washington inside the bubble who don't care about you. They don't care about your kids. They don't care about your kids' education. And they all send their kids to private schools. All they care about is the power, the graft, the friends they can reward financially. That's all that's about. And there are weird causes like, teaching kids to change their gender, whatever. So you're not going to lose a bit of education. You're probably going to gain some education if it's sent back to the states where it was for all of my life up until I went to high school, and for all of the lives of every American who came before us. There was no federal Department of Education. Okay, so that'd be great. Lots of great things Trump's going to do. I hope he comes through on Ukraine. Israel's a disaster. He's totally into the Israeli government neocon agenda. What are you going to do? I mean, with Biden, we got that plus Ukraine. If Trump's better on Ukraine, then that's a win. So, overall, I mean, I expect good things and bad things from the Trump administration. And honestly, I think the Biden administration is the first one in my lifetime where literally no good things occurred. They did zero good things. Now, Obama did mostly bad, but opening relations with Cuba and starting the road towards normalizing that was a good thing. Of course, Trump undid that. And, that's one of Mullen's corollaries to the great Scott Horton's law of elections, which Horton's law is all the good promises will be broken, all the bad ones will be kept. One of my corollaries, the first corollary, in fact, is that all of the good policies, or I should say the few good policies from the previous administration, will be undone and all the bad ones will be continued. Maybe Trump will break that cycle. I'd like to see that. Of course, Trump had the good policy of remain in Mexico, and immediately on his first day, Biden undid that. So Trump had a great energy policy. Now, the president shouldn't have an energy policy, shouldn't have the power to control how much oil is drilled. But unfortunately, the president does in our current scenario. And relatively speaking, Trump's was good. Biden undid that on his first day. So it's like, they all come in and they undo what little good the previous president did. But Biden didn't do anything good. And, I can't think of a single policy. And that's the first time I can remember that a president did absolutely no good while in office, all bad. So maybe he set a record there. Of course, FDR would be another one, but that's before my lifetime. So anyway, all that being said, I'm looking forward to Trump accomplishing some things to move us somewhat more towards being a free country again. My expectations are low, but I think some good things will happen. And maybe he'll even be a net positive. I mean, that would be good. Unlikely, but good. And that's not a personal attack on Trump. It's unlikely any president, given our current political structure, with all the power in the executive, Congress just a rubber stamp for funding, basically all the laws made by executive departments, and Trump not really questioning much of this, just thinking that that's done badly. It's going to be hard for any president to be a net positive. And really, I don't blame the presidents for that. I blame the people. The people have demanded all this. They demanded the New Deal, where we transferred all the legislative power, well, not all of it, but most of it, from the Congress to the executive. Okay. So at the end, it's the people get the government they demand, and they just don't seem to wake up to the fact that at the end of the day, it's all about, you can have a free country or you can plunder your fellow citizens, violate their property rights, either directly or through regulations. You can't do both. Okay. So you have to give up the plunder in order to be free yourself again. And Americans have not made that decision yet. We'll see. All right. So getting on to the main subject, now that I've done that disclaimer, so I don't get the 42 comments about how I'm a left-wing liberal, whatever. I see three. Here's what I'm afraid of, is that Trump's going to go on a rampage. That's good. The rampage is good, mostly. And he's going to get rid of some things like the Department of Education, going to fire a bunch of federal employees. He's trying to. I don't know how successful, but he's going to try, and some people are going to be gone. And if he succeeds in significantly cutting spending, which I don't know that he wants to do, honestly, when you do the whole net, is he just going to spend it on something else, like the military, which needs to be cut drastically as well? I don't know. But let's say he does. There's three different landmines in the economy that could blow it up, that they will then blame Trump's good executive actions for causing, and everybody will believe it. They'll say, look, he did these things and the economy tanked and the stock market crashed. And see, we told you not to elect him. Okay. That's what I'm afraid of. And the three things are basically tariffs, Federal Reserve open actions. Let me just say the Federal Reserve, and malinvestment. Now, everyone's talking about tariffs in a vacuum. So I'm going to talk about those first, and I may come back to them, because him imposing the tariffs, which again, by the way, that's a power reserved for Congress, the taxing power. So presidents can only do that through this phony, state of emergency thing. Like, oh, if I declare an emergency, well, then, then it's, I don't need the Congress to vote. I can just impose them myself. Now, Congress passed a law saying that he could do that, But Congress didn't have the power to pass that law. That's unconstitutional. If you want to transfer the taxing power from Congress to the president, you need a constitutional amendment. So passing some phony baloney emergency law, I declared an emergency. Now I'm going to start taxing instead of Congress, unconstitutional. But that didn't start with Trump. Every president in my lifetime has taken advantage of that too. I'm not sure if Carter did. I know Reagan did. All the Republicans fall for the whole, we have to put tariffs on steel or we're going to get in a war and not be able to make battleships or some whatever. Just complete idiot. But anyway, people are talking about the tariffs, and I was kind of surprised at how neutral Stephanie Pomboy, talking to Adam Taggart the other day, was on the tariffs. And one of the things she was saying was that tariffs will not be inflationary the way people say inflationary, meaning price increases, because what happened in 2008 was Trump raised tariffs, and the countries that he raised the tariffs on just subsidized their exporters so they could basically lower their price and sell the products to the U.S. at the same price. And then the tariff would be paid, but the importer, the American importer, would be getting that product at the same price. Now, a couple of things about that. Number one, if we're still importing the products and Trump is collecting all this money on tariffs, and I think I've said this before, then we're not protecting any domestic manufacturers. We're not creating manufacturing jobs that way. Why? Because we're still buying the foreign products. So it's not increasing the amount of domestically produced products we're producing. It only works if you raise the tariff so high that it's more expensive to buy the foreign import than it is to buy the domestically produced product. Okay, so that's number one. So the next time he goes on about how many billions of dollars he's collected, well, none of that helped American jobs. All right, by definition. I hope that's clear and I don't have to explain it more. Number two, I guess one of the things people might say to defend tariffs is that, yeah, but we're only doing it because the other side is putting tariffs on our products, and this is a way to get them to lower them. Now, if they lower their tariffs or abolish them, then that is good for the American economy. But even if they don't, let's say that they don't, we're still better off with no tariffs, even though the other country continues high tariffs, than if we respond with our own tariffs. And there's many reasons for that. Number one, the tariffs are a tax on ourselves, okay? We're just raising the price of goods that we're currently using. So nobody ever thinks about opportunity cost. Look, we put a tariff on steel, and now it costs more to import steel than it does to buy it here. Great. And so our steel production ramps up. I'm not saying this has happened, but let's just say that it does. This is the goal of the tariff, after all. So now we're producing more of our own steel, but it costs a lot more than what we used to pay for the imported steel. And I know more about steel than an English major should for reasons I won't go into. So I know that like the Chinese steel's lower grade, and then, there's all kinds of different grades of steel. But in any case, our manufacturing sector goes up and it creates more jobs. And look, we got all these new jobs in manufacturing steel. But the problem is we're paying way more for the steel. So before, let's just say, I'll just use silly numbers. A pound of steel costs $50, okay? And it doesn't cost that much, but let's say it costs $10. So you have a pound, you buy a pound of steel, you give up $10. Let's say you have 100. You buy a pound of steel, imported, costs $10, and you have $90 left to spend on other things. Invest in other domestic manufacturing, which is what you're doing if you put your money in the savings bank. And not necessarily goes to domestic, but most of it does. Okay. Now you put these big tariffs on, and it's not like steel's going to double. It's going to more than double. So now it costs $30 a pound. So after you buy that domestic steel, you still have only the 1 pound of steel, but instead of having $90 left, you only have 70. Where'd that $20 go that you used to have left over? It's gone. It's wasted. It's literally just, you could light a match to it. All right. So you don't have that money to spend domestically anymore. So even it just never helps to put it. That's the simplest explanation. Plus, when you put the tariffs on, of course, there is supply and demand still work on imports, right? So if they cost more, people are going to import less. Does that mean they're going to produce more? Maybe, but when you import less, you're going to have an effect on pricing as well. And you're going to make the people selling you the goods you still have to import, if there's tariffs, raise their own prices. Now, again, in the short term, their governments may subsidize them. They may lower their prices. But let's not forget that making our trading partners poorer also does not benefit us. Because even if we're having a trade deficit with with China, by them subsidizing their manufacturers, that's making their country as a whole poorer. Okay, because they're taking money from the economy, the Chinese economy, and they're just wasting it on, the subsidizing the tariffs instead of putting it to productive use. So over time, that's going to make them poorer, and their demand for our goods is going to go down. Okay. So, I mean, economically, tariffs just burn money. They just light a match to it. Okay. They're never good in any circumstances, even if, okay, so if Trump threatens tariffs, I'm going to put a 50% tariff on Canada unless you get rid of all yours. And then they get rid of all theirs. And Trump never puts the big tariff on. Yes, that would benefit everybody. In the short term, there might be some market panic. Some behaviors might change, people buying more than they otherwise would in the short term because they're trying to get ahead of the tariff. Yeah, but in the long run, if there were no tariffs anymore between us and Canada, which I thought was supposed to be the idea of the USMCA, whatever it's called, then that would be good. But to the extent that, we retaliate with our tariffs, even if they stay the same or they lower theirs a little, but overall there's more taxes in total being charged by both countries, that's just wasting money. It's wasting resources. It is diverting resources to both governments, and all government spending, as I've said many times, is either a deadweight loss or a total loss. One of the two. Neither one is good. So they always make you poorer. But they may be especially harmful with the situation the economy is in right now. And that brings us to the Fed and malinvestment. So we had a very strange, economic experience after 2020, which was we didn't have your normal recession where, basically the Austrian business cycle in a nutshell is the Fed inflates the currency. It puts more money into the economy and thereby lowers the interest rate. It doesn't work that way anymore, and I'll get to that in a minute. But with more money available to be lent and lower interest rates resulting, then lending becomes less strict. Because this is not fueled by savings, there's no trade-off here. People have not stopped consuming. The way that investment's supposed to happen is people in general on net don't consume as much, and that makes savings go up, and the savings are used to invest in expanding production. And then at the end of that cycle, the whole economy, we're all richer because we're producing more. Okay, that's how it's supposed to work. When the Fed just creates new money and No one is saving. You know, it starts misdirecting resources. They call that malinvestment. And, we see what happens that, during the dot-com bubble, it blows up bubbles that all way too much money went into tech stocks, not only stocks that expanded farther than they should have because they're misled by the lower interest rates, but also companies that should never get funded at all, like pets.com. And what happens is that as debt accumulates, as the market gets away in valuation from the real underlying earnings, at some point that bubble pops. And all those malinvestments, all those investments that should have been made, should not have been made, loans that should not have been given, had money been tighter and interest rates been higher, they all fall apart. And then the reason that you get all these people unemployed is they were mistakenly, erroneously directed by that Fed inflation. Inflation being increase in the supply of money and credit. They were misdirected into places that they shouldn't have been. Way too many people working for what we'd call a zombie tech company, a company that can't survive on its own profits, but just depends on all this easy money and credit. Okay, so that's the way the bubble cycle works. Of course, there are business cycles without a central bank, especially in a fractional reserve system, but they're not nearly as severe as the ones we've experienced since the Fed. Of course, their story is, oh, we've made them much less severe, but that's just not true. And then, of course, in 2008, we had this bubble going to housing. And, for whatever reason, because of other policies that helped direct money, all this money floods into the housing market. And way too many houses get built and way too many people leverage up because the Fed was inflating to try and avoid the corrections that were coming from the dot-com bubble bursting, right? So there is some cleaning out. Now, if the Fed did nothing, all of the zombie companies would be cleaned out, and you would start on a very firm foundation to rebuild the economy after the recession, but they never let that happen. So they blow up a housing bubble the same way they blew up a dot-com bubble, and that explodes. It's even worse because what we've been seeing is that for every dollar of inflation, we're getting less and less economic growth each cycle. And that's been happening for many cycles. So we go through that prolonged recession and malaise, and I would make an argument that it's possible that if you could get in and really get into the plumbing of all these economic indices, that we may be in a long depression, just like the Great Depression. They keep trumpeting all these jobs we create, and then, quietly a quarter later or whatever, they say, oh, we actually didn't. They're revising them down by 1 million jobs a year or close to it. So I'm not saying that's the case, but I think that our economy, if it's growing, it's been very muted. There's lots of great things going on, but all of this negative overhang, all these zombie companies, all the green energy companies, they can't make money, not on their own, okay? And a lot of money has gone into that sector. There's a ton in education, and many years ago, I said education was a huge bubble, that if they ever got rid of the funding for it, and really what you have to get rid of is federally guaranteed student loans, that would be a massive, massive explosion. Now, I don't know what's involved in Trump's getting rid of the Department of Education, but if it comes down to not guaranteeing those loans anymore, which we shouldn't be doing, that's a huge unwind, though, because there's millions of people who work in education they're not productive. Those jobs shouldn't exist. And as I think a lot of people have said that, when all this money started flowing towards education, they didn't hire more teachers. They just kept hiring more administrators, piling administrators on top of administrators, So a manager managing the managers, managing the managers, managing the teachers, right? So like none of that's needed. We had great education without all that. So you know that that's not adding anything. And of course, it has no market value because nobody can say no to it. It's all publicly funded. So, we don't get to find out, is this administrator worth what we're paying them? We don't know because no one can refuse to pay them or refuse to pay them more. Okay? There's no market price. And that goes for everybody in the federal government or any government. No matter how good a job they're doing, we don't know because there's the only reason the free market works, it's not because the people in it are better. It's because the incentives are the opposite of what's in the government. If people don't feel what you're giving them is worth it, they just stop buying it. But nobody can stop buying government services. You're not allowed to. So actually, what's really bad about such a big government is it attracts so many good people. And then they're in this backwards incentive structure where when you fail, you get more funding rather than the other way around in the private sector. So in any case, you've got all this malinvestment. And in 2020, it looked like we were about to have another recession. And then they did the COVID thing. Now, there's many theories like they did it to avoid the recession, but they kind of imposed a recession. They just ordered everybody to stay home. But they did not. When the market does it, it finds the bad companies, the zombie companies, and puts them out of business. What they did was put a whole bunch of small businesses that may have survived or probably would have survived out of business. And they kept a lot of zombies alive with funding. So it was like a backwards recession. It did the opposite of what a recession is supposed to do. See, when a recession sheds all those jobs, it's actually a healthy thing. It's not pleasant, and you should feel bad for the people who lose their jobs. They were misdirected by forces beyond their control into a sector that didn't need their input, okay? But it is healthy for the economy as a whole because eventually they go to jobs that are profitable, where we really need their labor in profitable enterprises. Well, in 2020, they did the opposite. So all these zombie companies were kept alive. Good companies were put out of business. Yeah, some zombies probably went out of business too, but they printed $5 trillion. As I've said before, they put $2 trillion kind of in a holding pattern, but let's just say they printed $3 trillion. And that didn't just cause price inflation, it caused even more malinvestment, more new malinvestment. It sustained the existing malinvestment. It torpedoed good companies that make us richer, collectively by being productive and being profitable. So it was really, really a bad thing. And that has not unwound yet. So Trump comes into the office. There's all kinds of things he wants to do that will be positive for the economy, but he's walking in with this overhang of huge malinvestment, huge corporate debt, breaking all records. I don't know that the stock market is at a record-breaking valuation, but it's really high. Okay, and it usually reverts to the mean as far as price earnings and those types of metrics. So it's a bubble that's looking to be popped. Tariffs could pop it. What I said about the Fed and what it's been doing, I don't think at any time ever has the Fed been lowering interest rates and decreasing the money supply at the same time. And you can go back to my previous podcast or my article, which I'll hope to remember to put it on the show notes page of is the Fed loosening or tightening? It's complicated, that one. If you don't know what I mean by that, I don't want to go into the whole thing again. But basically, the Fed is doing two conflicting things at once. It's lowering interest rates, which is encouraging banks to lend more. But at the same time, it's decreasing the money supply. When its balance sheet goes down, that means it's sucked that much money out of the economy. Okay, so it's simultaneously, supposedly, decreasing the amount of money that is available for banks to lend, but then it's encouraging to lend more with the lower rates. Now, it's not really doing the decreasing the money supply yet, because while it has reduced its balance sheet, that reverse repo market has supplied to the economy all the money that the Fed has taken out. But we're right here. We're at the bottom. The reverse repo market this morning was under $100 billion. Used to be at $2 trillion. The Fed has reduced its balance sheet by $2 trillion. So it sucked $2 trillion out of the economy. Reverse repo markets put $2 trillion back in. That trade-off is no longer available. So will the Fed keep tightening, keep reducing its balance sheet? If it does, it's really going to be taking net money out of the economy. So even while it's saying it's lowering interest rates, it's going to be sucking the lifeblood of money out of the economy that banks use to lend. That's a potential torpedo. And then even with lower interest rates, we get, a crash, a recession, all that malinvestment unwinds. So we have to see if that's going to happen. I've tried to shout as loud as possible that this is a landmine. And really, it's all up to Jay Powell, what he decides to do, really from here on in. I mean, with the reverse repo at 97 billion, it's really a non-factor. The Fed's balance sheet went from 8.9 trillion down to 6.7 trillion. So it's gone down 2 trillion. From here on in, if it reduces significantly, that's real money coming out of the economy. And that could potentially take the economy down. And then I guess the last thing is that even if neither of those things happen, even if tariffs aren't significant and the Fed kind of stands pat or even starts increasing the money supply again, just the amount of malinvestment that's out there is got to unwind sometime. And all these things could blow up the economy early in Trump's term this year. They might not. I mean, as a libertarian, we know that the government is constantly doing harmful things to the economy, that it's running on a grossly distorted model. So we're always pessimistic because it's like, no, we should be doing things right. But one thing I've learned in the last 20, 25 years is you can go on doing the wrong thing for a long, long time. And don't forget, there's countervailing good things happening in the economy, real innovation, real new investment that's counteracting. And it's a matter of like, is it enough? Okay. And at some points, the malinvestment and the distortion overhang is too much, even for all the good things happening. And that's when we get these big corrections. So I guess my fear is that if this happens this year, then everyone's going to blame the good things that Trump has done. And most people will believe it. Even some MAGA people will falter. This is bad. Maybe he shouldn't have done as much. He should. No. Okay. Getting rid of the Department of Education. Getting rid of federally guaranteed loans, if that's part of it, that will pop the bubble. That will pop a bubble, and that will possibly pop the big bubble. And if we get some pain, which Trump has warned we could, I think he's talking more about tariffs, but that would be a big one and very possible. And it wouldn't be completely wrong for left-wing economists to say, see, you caught it, you got rid of loans, and that caused this big economic catastrophe. Yeah, but what we got rid of was all the non-productive jobs. That's what happened. And all the non-productive institutions, the ones that aren't worth the money that's being put into them. So that has to happen sooner or later. And it's always painful. It's just a matter that, when you have distorted your economy and directed so many resources into non-productive ends, directing them to something else is not pleasant. It never is. It has to happen, or it just keeps getting worse and you keep getting poorer. And, one of the reasons that, there's so many, such a disproportionate amount of lower paying jobs, it's not because trade deals allowed manufacturing to go overseas. Part of it, manufacturing, this is another thing I'll just say. I tweeted it recently. Manufacturing has never made up more than 30% of the economy I should say, of jobs. So of all the jobs, it's never been the case that more than 30% of them were manufacturing. And it only hit 30, like during World War II. And every other year, it's been below 30, in the 20s or teens, where it is now. Okay. So at least 70 and usually 75% or more of people at the highest watermark for manufacturing jobs, 75% were doing something else. We're not working in manufacturing. So this is not this dream world where everyone's going to have a manufacturing job that pays them $100,000 a year to screw the same bolt in all day. That's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. Okay, but that's a sidelight. But in any case, we're going to at some point we have to unwind all this malinvestment, and the malinvestment, the amount of capital that's put into non-productive ends, that's all capital that's not put into productive ends. And what raises wages is increased worker productivity. Okay. So that's one of the reasons jobs are as low paying as they are. There's no silver bullet. There's no utopia. But by this point in history, with all the innovation that's occurred over the last 200 years, our poorest people should be even richer than they are. I mean, we don't have poor people in America like they have in, let's say, Panama, where I've been, or Mexico, or, in Asia. But we have people that are poorer than we'd like them to be. They have cell phones. They have roofs over their heads. Poor people in Panama, I've seen people live in cardboard boxes. No lie. Whole towns full of them. So, we're a rich country. We could be richer, and the disparity between the bottom and the top could be a lot less if we didn't waste so much money directing it towards non-productive ends. And we're going to have another big unwinding sometime. And I'm worried about the timing. And that's really where I was going with for this episode, is that these landmines, and I don't think Trump's team is paying attention to the non-tightening that has been going on and the potential tightening, not of interest rates, but the money supply that could occur. If Jay Powell wants to torpedo the economy, he can with the stroke of his pen. I don't even know if he actually has to write anything down. He could just say it. But all he's got to do, and he really doesn't even have to do anything, is the way they've been reducing their balance sheet is they've been just letting the money coming in to pay interest and principal on the bonds that they hold and the mortgage-backed securities they hold. They've been just letting those roll off. They haven't even been going out to the member banks and buying and selling securities, because that would suck money out faster. They're just letting it trickle out, and it's trickled down $2 trillion in the last few years. But again, the reverse repo market has given that money back to the economy. That's over. So if Powell just doesn't do anything, he could tank the economy this year by letting that balance sheet keep going down. And he could do it while he's saying, look, I lowered interest rates. I lowered them again. And I'm not sure that the Trump administration has their eye on that ball. So I'm worried about that. And in general, when I hear people talking about loose monetary policy, and they're focused on interest rates as if they still work the same way as they did in 2005, and they don't. I explained that in my last podcast. So go back and listen to that if you don't understand why. But just lowering interest rates does not decrease the money supply anymore. I'm sorry, raising interest rates does not decrease the money supply anymore. Lowering interest rates does not increase the money supply anymore. Okay, that's not the case anymore. So basically, they've lowered interest rates and the money supply has stayed the same. If Jay Powell does nothing, the money supply is going to decrease no matter what they do with interest rates, even if they keep lowering them. And that's the part I think no one's looking at. So I think I've said it 6 different ways, or maybe the same way 5 times. Sorry about that. I turn on, well, I don't have cable, so I don't watch TV, but I see clips of financial people talking about what the Fed's doing, and everyone seems to be talking like the Fed still works like it did in 2005, and it doesn't. And that's why Powell is able to do 2 opposite things at once. So watch out for that. We'll keep talking about it here, and we'll see. I'm going to keep watching that balance sheet. If it gets down to $6 trillion, well, then it really took that money out of the money supply because there's not that much left in reverse repo to make it up. Okay, we'll see you next time.
The war of ideas has only just begun. Arm yourself with the knowledge you need by heading to TomMullenTalksFreedom.com and subscribing to our email list. And remember, every revolution starts in the minds of the people.